Welcome everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Corley. I'm DFI's community manager. And one of the things that I do is organize our webinar schedule. And I'm super excited for the great panelists and topic debate that we're going to have today. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. So please, if you've got questions for the panelists, if you can put that in the Q&A function, which will pop up on the menu on the bottom when you sort of hover your mouse or move your finger on your phone. Please let's use the chat just for saying hi to each other in informal chat, but if you've got official questions, pop them in the Q&A. Also, just a reminder that we're recording today's session. We will be sending a link around to everybody who registered for the session and also putting it up on our YouTube channel and on our website tomorrow. So if you happen to drop off because of bad signal or you really enjoyed the session and want to share it with a colleague, you'll be very able to do so. So I'm really excited for today's session. I think we look at lots of different topics on our webinars, but this is a really nice topic to get us into at the moment. So APIs, we talk about it a lot. It seems like quite a big thing sometimes. It can feel like it's a complicated thing to do, but we've got 4 amazing people who are going to tell us a little bit more about how we should go about thinking about it and approach it. Between them, I don't know if I'm insulting them by saying they've probably got decades of experience, not trying to imply you guys are old, but just trying to imply there's a lot of seniority and experience within the room, which is great. So we have Michelle, Aiz, Leslie, and Paul. And Paul even stayed up very late at night for you guys. He's in the other hemisphere. It's probably way past his bedtime, but we're very glad that everybody's made the effort to be with us today. So without further ado, let me hand over to Michelle, who's going to kick off the session with you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So yeah, for those of you that don't know CGAP, I'd encourage you to take a quick look at our website, cgap.org. We've been working on open APIs for the last 4 years or so, and the last 3 of those have been with 5 partners. So what we'll share with you today will come from work with those partners, which are MTN, ABSA in South Africa, Wave Money, and Zona, and who did I miss there? BTPN Bank in Indonesia. In addition to checking out our website, take a look. It might be easier just to Google CGAP Open API Collection. You'll find like a range of sources that we've put up over the last couple of years, everything from how to get started to thinking about your pricing, your technology building blocks, how to engage third parties. So there's kind of a range of things there. And we'll also be putting up a couple more case studies and infographic over the next couple of weeks. So so check that out. Just in terms of CGAP, we are a think tank that is housed at the World Bank. There's about 30 donor organizations that pool their resources and allow us to focus on advancing financial inclusion. And the way we typically do that is we partner with organizations that are at the forefront of a specific topic, and then we act like a knowledge bank. So we kind of learn along the way with them, as we have with our partners on open APIs, and then we share those lessons more broadly as we are trying to do on this webinar. I guess it's important to note that as with the rest of the industry, CGAP is not just trying to pursue financial inclusion for the sake of financial inclusion, but it's really about how do financial services help the lives of poor people. So during this webinar, we'll try and do 3 things. So the first thing is we will share some lessons from, or some examples of DFS providers. Why did they open APIs and what was the impact on the business? Secondly, we'll get into a couple of insights in terms of like, how do you get started? What 3 things to keep in mind as you get started, as well as some risks. And then we'll share directly from some of our partners and our advisors, the advice that they give in terms of what they've learned along this journey. So as Sarah said, please do put in some Q&A, your questions into the Q&A. We'd love to keep it as interactive as possible. And then lastly, I'm not going to go through each of my colleagues and introduce them formally. Check them out on LinkedIn. I will say that what has set them apart in the work that they've done with CGAP is their ability to kind of go deep on a quite a technical topic, but not get caught up on the technology at all, and then really focus on like, what is the business objective of what we're trying to do, and what are the kind of operational things that we need to change in order to get the most out of that technology and to achieve those business objectives. So like each of them has that ability to span those things. And I think that's one of the messages that we have, is that this is not really as technological as it sounds. We really focus on the business model objectives and why we're doing this and the implications for your organization, rather than just the pure technology. As Sarah said, a special thank you to Paul for staying up. I think it's officially Thursday, Paul, in the last couple of minutes. So thank you for that, man. So a little context, Paul, if you can go to the first slide, a little context on why we are working on open APIs. So I think the first point to make is that usage remains a problem. So we still see a lot of dormant accounts, and we still see a lot of specific use cases dominating usage. So we see money transfers, we see airtime purchases. We have seen some expansion, but for the most part, they continue to dominate. So the changes that we're seeing don't happen as quickly as we want. And the growth that we see is often more people joining DFS platforms rather than a significant increase in the number of transactions per person. And that's one of the things we want to change. And we think a key way to change that is to enable more relevant use cases for end customers. And we think those will be kind of use cases that are interconnected into the experience for customers, where financial services is just part of a broader solution that helps poor people or all people improve their lives. So for example, we've seen financial services play a significant role in the take-up of pay-as-you-go solar energy. We also see financial services as a way to help more and more people both sell their goods and buy goods on digital platforms, as well as to access loans that can help them grow their business. So our focus is really on, how do financial services help the lives of people, as opposed to just financial services for the sake of it. I think we don't see this range of use cases coming from the large issuers. It's really challenging. There's a number of reasons for this, why they struggle to innovate in a number of directions at the same time. So we do see them come up with cool use cases, but it's really like, one or two, rather than being able to innovate and cater for niche segments. And we see that coming from third parties. The challenge is that historically, third parties find it difficult to build on top of existing rails. So either they spend a lot of time trying to integrate into existing players, so lots of time, but also lots of costs involved, as well as opaque processes, or they tend to rebuild stuff that already exists in the industry. So we see, a lot of new wallets coming up, for example, where existing infrastructure exists. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're trying to solve. And we see the potential for open APIs to play that role as the kind of glue that links together the existing rails with this plethora of new use cases. I think that's kind of the goal. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that it's challenging, but we've also seen that it's doable. So this is, it's possible, and that it can be beneficial both for financial service providers and for third parties that use them, as well as for end customers. So I think that's kind of at a very high level, some of the reasons why we've been working on open APIs. I think with that, let me hand over to Paul and Ayaz to get into some of the examples of DFS providers that have done this and are realizing the benefits.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. So Ayaz and I are going to talk about, just lead with 3 examples of DFS providers who are using open API successfully. So I'm going to start with Echo. Echo is a fintech based out of India. Their core proposition is to use agents to offer to customers who pay in cash over the counter services. Their core product is remittance. And they had a lot of success initially, but then they started stalling their growth. So they stopped and re-looked at their business. So their traditional business is what you see in the sort of the dark blue at the top, where they're connecting, sort of basic payments and bill payment services to agents. And their challenge was that they couldn't expand. And then on the demand side, you have a look at the agents. Is how do you expand that number of agents? And they're having trouble onboarding agents themselves, just in terms of having the capital and the operational reach to go across India. And then same for service providers as well, as how do you onboard more service providers? They undertook an assessment and said their strength is in technology, and their compliance around bank payments. And they also saw an opportunity for suppliers. They wanted to integrate with one provider that would give them access across India. So what Echo did was they created an open API that allowed third-party network managers to integrate into their platform and to give them access to that supply side services, so that all their bank integrations, money transfer, bill payments, but also it allowed them to connect in quite easily. And to give you an example of these third-party providers, think agent managers for airtime bill pay, consumer goods, who have or are building their own agent networks themselves, particularly in a geographic area where it is people intense to actually set up and run these networks. And so they made it easy for these agents to integrate into their platform and to offer these variety of services through their own technology that they're using. As we jump into what this has meant for Echo, so again, dark blue is the agents that they've acquired directly themselves, and light blue is what has been acquired through their third-party agent network managers. So you're looking at about 10 times in the space of 3 years of growing their agent network from 15,000 to about 150,000. And their coverage across India has gone from just being 10 states to all 26 states. And this is quite important just in terms of the ability to scale quickly. It takes a lot of capital to go out and grow this without that open API partnership, and these other partners were able to do that. It's also important for that supply side that we talked about, and some examples of some new supplies that has been brought on is subscription TV. So a Netflix equivalent in India. It's a very small amount to get access every month, but for cash paying customers who don't have a card or even a bank account that can be drawn on, they've got the ability to go to up to 150,000 agents across India to top in. Other services are online education as well. And they're really starting to see these digital services explode. Then when we get into the cost to acquire and support, now on the left side, the symbol didn't come through, but that's India rupiah. So effectively, the cost to acquire a customer has dropped from the equivalent of $30 per agent down to about $5, so 1/6 of the price. That's allowed Echo to considerably expand that network without needing a lot of capital to expand. And then on the right side, you're looking at the number of staff required to support. Again, 50 staff is required to support their original business, and to expand an extra 130,000 agents, it only took an additional 10 staff. And then when we get into the revenue, I think this is super interesting as well. Echo share their revenue, the fee revenue they make from the supply side, 50-50 with the partner. Now, while that eats into Echo's potential revenue, what you're seeing on the left side is just the volume that's coming through all those additional agents, plus you're seeing those agents growing at about 4 times greater in terms of the number of transactions coming through. So Echo's been a great example. You see some comments from Echo later in the webinar through a video, but they've been a great success. So I'll hand over to Ayaz, who's going to talk about NTN.
Thank you, Paul, and hi everyone. So, in the case of MTN, and I'm sure there's a lot of participants from Sub-Saharan Africa, and they know MTN very well. I don't think they were actually really trying to solve a major business problem when they started. I think it was more of a positioning of the platform, of MTN's platform, as sort of a core engine at the heart of the digital economy. I think MTN had as a strategy and envisioned themselves actually as a key enabler of digital economies across the markets where they operated. And they really saw an opportunity in that they were sitting on a number of assets that were important to them. They were sitting on large number of customers, obviously with a lot of identity records about these customers. They were sitting on a lot of payment transactions and payments data that could be harnessed for credit scoring and for other business models. They were obviously sitting on data itself about their customers and transactions of the customers. And they were also having, by virtue of having a large number of customers, they had access to a mobile interface to interact with these customers that was extremely valuable. And so in many ways, being at the heart of all these different assets that they had in their operations, they felt that opening these assets to a number of third parties and third-party players and providers for them to easily connect to these assets and be able to then use them to develop innovative use cases around mobile insurance, mobile remittance, savings, group savings, different types of payments, lending, etc., was potentially a very powerful proposition. And I think so in the case of MTN, what really motivated them in a sense was that they saw that opportunity and they saw themselves as sort of the key core central open platform that would really be powering the digital economies in the countries where they operate. And I think in terms of the impacts that they were looking at on the business model, obviously they were looking at advancing new use cases simply by sort of making it easier and even digitizing the process of discovery, of onboarding, of testing, of negotiating commercial contracts with third parties, but also really launching third-party innovations. By facilitating all of this, they were hoping that that would be generating more use cases. And by generating more use cases on their platform, that obviously adds to the utility of the services and drives customer activity, which in turn is going to drive more transactions, and obviously is going to be generating more revenue streams on the MTN mobile money platform. And I think the way they positioned this, again, in addition to these sort of direct benefits, was that that would become sort of the foundation for their future growth. MTN had plans to launch financial marketplaces, e-commerce marketplaces as well internally to potentially compete with Jumia, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa. And the core open API business model was sort of the foundation that would be enabling them to really position themselves within that rich ecosystem, but also advance their own line of products and services in the future. In terms of what this has been doing to the business, and if you don't mind moving to the next slide, I won't be able to share any revenue numbers because I think it's sort of still a bit early to start looking at revenue impact. But what's happened for sure is, first of all, because of MTN's group structure, we started the project in Uganda, but they've been able to really harness what's been built in Uganda for the rest of their operations. And so very quickly, MTN has been launching open APIs across 10 different markets. So they're continuing to roll it out across the 23 operations that they have. And that in and of itself is already going to create a lot of scale. What we are seeing right now is that there's already over 10,000 third parties and developers actually experimenting on the sandbox and testing functionalities as they get ready to launch. And of these, there's already 400 startups and innovators that are actually live in production on the platform. And that's already generated over 10 million API calls per month. And this is sort of on a very steep curve and ramping up quite quickly as MTN starts engaging more and more effectively third parties. I think in terms of how to look at the impact, perhaps another way of looking at it is to say that, before open APIs, when third-party innovators and startups were trying to approach MTN to launch an innovative product on the MTN platform, the cycle to be able to launch from the first conversation, negotiating contracts, commercials, etc., was between 9 to 12 months. And I think since they actually launched open APIs by automating all of these interactions and by streamlining the process on the open API platform and sort of digitalizing all that experience, they've been able to reduce that to something close to a month pretty much. And they're again optimizing their internal processes to even shorten that life cycle. And I think that's really advanced the speed of launching innovation in a number of their markets.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. So I just want to finish up just talking a little bit about Paytm. Paytm's a very interesting business. So probably we're a little bit different from Echo, what we saw in India, was after cash paying customers. Paytm's got this natural ecosystem of about 350 million wallet customers. So they saw an opportunity to go out and connect to corporates who wanted to pay out to that ecosystem of customers. So the first step that Paytm did was they went out and did some detailed research with corporates to understand their needs and what would be required to integrate Paytm payment services into their platforms to disperse to whether it's salary, whether it's vendor payments and whatnot. I think what they discovered is after they launched the open APIs with the expectation that these corporates would be able to integrate, is they found that the large corporates could, but they found a number of corporates that really struggled in terms of not the desire to do it or even the capability. It just came down to a prioritization within that business. With a larger business with internal IT had sort of core business priorities that meant that this was pushed back down the queue. So what Paytm did is they realized that they wanted to get their integration times down from about 3 weeks less, which is a big company problem. So they actually, on top of their open APIs, they created an additional dashboard which allowed the business side within a corporate partner to upload payment files and pull in reporting details from Paytm, their payout service, which allowed them to get to market within 2 days of launching. Now, the intention was that the corporates could integrate into their system at a later point, but what they're finding out is that the corporates are quite happy to work with the web interface on top of the APIs as well, which help accelerate. Now, in terms of how successful this has been in COVID, I think in the first 3 months, I think about 200 million US dollars in disbursements were made through the payout function. So I'm going to pause here and send it over to Leslie Ann to talk about the next section.
Do you want to move one slide on, Paul? So we were working with our partners to try and make these things come alive. You heard some awesome stories, but how did they go about doing it? So there was 3 S's that we've taken into this puzzle. The first one, I think you heard probably loud and clear, that doing APIs well means linking it to your strategic business priorities. Understand the why before you worry about the details of how. And you heard from Eco, it was about network extension. You heard from Paytm, it was about time to integrate because they wanted so many more integrations. It's not purely driven on revenue. It's actually, there's this shorter term ROI than might be on the table long term. What we also said to our partners, and the partners that were successful at getting to market, keep it simple. Figure out something that is a little bit lower risk and start. Apply some of the design thinking, lean mindset to it and figure out the changes that need to be made. For example, one of our partners looked at their value stream for what it's like to be on the journey from a third party to be in a place where they can actually transact. So we did some journey analysis and we spotted that actually there's quite a lot of friction in that process. And so they discovered that it wasn't just about building the API, actually. They needed to go and talk to lots of different departments to think about the business process of onboarding. That became possible because they'd already chosen to do something quite simple in their strategy. And so they could really talk about it in a very clear way with the various departments. And the third principle with all of our partners, we talk a lot with our partners about self-service. The reality is that APIs have been around for a long, long time. I was part of the original M-Pesa team and we were integrating to ATMs and all kinds of things for a long time. But it involved a lot of energy and effort and conversations with the third party that we were going to work with. A core difference between how integrations work and how we think about APIs today is actually the fact that you can think about how to make this self-service, and the word open comes from that moment of going, actually, how do you let third parties discover for themselves what you offer, as opposed to getting into individual conversations with every single one of them. So we applied those 3 principles throughout of all of our projects, but we also learned things along the way. So Michelle, we were talking about this earlier, and actually we find it's quite easy to get into, isn't this a tech problem mindset? And I think a big part of the conversation that we've had with our partners is it's way more than just the technology. It's actually, it's about getting every department to understand what this is about, what this is for, and making process changes along the way to actually make it possible. And we work with legal parties and all kinds of things. We also find that we had to be very careful of a build it and they will come mindset. You can open APIs. That doesn't mean you get the return on investment. You've really got to think about your engagement strategies. And we also find that if we push too hard towards more risky use cases, actually sometimes nothing happens. You need it's impossible to kind of bite off too much of the piece all at once. So that was a high level where we kind of took away the takeaways from all of our projects in one go. Michelle, is there anything you want to add to that?
Thanks, Leslie-Ann. I mean, I think it's useful. I think one of the things that we found on the tech side, just to add to what you were saying, is I think that there was often or in some cases, there was this kind of disconnect depending on who was building it. And one of the things that really almost challenging in this, and I think in a number of other innovation projects, is the way that the technology and the business teams work together, and the kind of disconnects that can arise from that if they're not in line. So I don't know if you maybe can just kind of elaborate on that a little bit, and how that played out, and any suggestions.
This is a subject close to my heart as a product manager. I feel very strongly that this is something that the details matter. And so you can build an API, but how do you know if it's going to solve the problems? So the way that we thought about it in our projects was to bring some design thinking to the puzzle. And so we would be actively thinking about how to focus group with the users of the API. And we'd be thinking about how to bring that lessons back in and be very customer centric in how we attacked what was important. So you'll hear me talk quite a lot about journey maps and friction and funnels as a way for us to measure progress and improvement. I would say that was an important part of our discovery process. We also, to take it beyond the tech, we had to look deeply at our business processes, and therefore the technology that was needed to support those business processes, because the API itself wasn't enough technology. We also had to think about what happens when a new third party wants to join. How do they apply? How do they get to a place where they've done their UAT? How do they get to a place where they've tested, but maybe they actually don't know that they're ready to go live yet? What is a sandbox? What's it for? Is it just for testing the syntax, or is it for actually helping your third party to get to a place where they get to volumes and understand their own business? Oh, you're on mute, Michelle.
Thank you. I think one of the things that stands out for me as a takeaway from a lot of this, particularly as we shift towards self-service, is that drop off in the numbers, for example, that we saw with MTN, where you've got these 10,000 developers in the sandbox and you've got 400 live projects. And I think it's important to note here that this is kind of part of the beauty of open APIs, is that because you're investing less in each party, and you don't have to be that kind of that the almost a bottleneck in who gets through and how much you invest in each one. You can let a range of third parties come through, and I think that's useful, because it's hard to know which ones are going to kind of rise to the top out of that. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is if you're going on this journey, I think you can be comfortable in that. And that was one of the points that a lot of our advisors kind of made, was like, yep, that's normal.
It's normal, and that's how funnel analysis works. But the reality was we had to get quite a lot of change in mindset to make it possible to do that, because normally the process starts with the legal contracts and not with the integration. And this is turning it completely on its head and saying, let's have a standardized contract, standard way people can interact, let them get into the sandbox and assess when they're ready to go live. And it's quite a different way to think about things that's not normal unless you're really truly thinking about how this segment that you've never played with before play. Because the reality is developers are people too, right? They are working for a business. That business is trying to earn an income. Or maybe they're an entrepreneur and they've got an idea and they're trying to think about how to take that idea to market. And they're not just writing code for the sake of it. They still have to eat as well. And so it's that moment of being mindful and customer centric as to what actually is going on the other side of your API.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of the things that we've seen, I mean, it's still early days, so we're still trying to extract, like, what does this mean for third parties? But one of the things we do see is that some of these innovators, because they're, you know, 1 or 2 person show, that their business model can work in a way that it wouldn't work for a large corporate. And I think that's kind of one of the other things that is almost exciting about this, that you can get these people that are focusing on rural education payments, as opposed to these, you know, so really niche and the customers we care about.
This is a big part of our hypothesis, right? We actually started the project with a mindset of how might we get more of the niche innovators actually thinking about these things. And certainly the business case for doing this for a big enterprise, it's tough. And we've seen that in Uganda, particularly when we've been talking with the developer community, that the reality is that these innovators are very keen on having access to the mobile money rails, particularly the payments use cases, for this reason.
Thanks, Leslie. And I think I could keep picking your brain for a while on this, but why don't we hand over to Paul? Paul, do you want to take us and maybe hear directly from some of our partners and advisors?
Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from some of our partners and advisors. So again, this has been a multi-year project with SIGAP, with a number of partners across the world. But also in the following videos, you also hear from Advisory Council, where we got some of the leaders in business who have adopted open APIs. So the first video we're going to talk to is, we asked some of these leaders, when going fully open makes sense.
M-Pesa, as the largest financial services company in Kenya, we had streams of developers coming to our door looking to integrate with the preeminent, dominant payment platform in the country. And it was taking months and months and months for these developers to be able to get APIs working. By going with an open API platform with a developer portal, documentation, automating the registration, for new developers to come on board, it meant that we could cut costs and increase the efficiency of opening up the access to the dominant platform for payments.
We think there is opportunity to just stimulate innovation in the market by making it easy for entrepreneurs and innovators to access the technology and the infrastructure. 2, of course, we want to get efficiencies from that, both for ourselves and for our customers who currently go through aggregators, and so they pay a bit more. But also internally as MTN, we want to offload some of the things that can actually be automated onto the open API and use our time for more strategic things.
That's the vision for us at Scylla, is to build an easy-to-use, developer-centric API platform so that people who want to do innovative things in finance can build and ship their innovative apps and do it in a matter of weeks, not years.
We've
been in the market for a long time building our own products, and it takes a lot of time and effort to build products and engage customers and do that. And even within that dynamic, we are only building products for such a small number of the use cases that are out there. So for us, opening up our APIs is a way of allowing other businesses, be it corporates or smaller businesses, to plug into the infrastructure, into the regulations that we've got, that can really allow the number of services that are being offered on top of our platform to exponentially grow without us having to drive it directly ourselves. We actually believe in it so much so that we are almost pivoting away from being a product business to being a core platform business. And with that actually becoming our kind of core focus over the next few years.
So just pausing here for a few minutes just to see if anyone's got any questions relating to the presentation so far or that video. We've got another 2 videos to come, and we'll have some other pause points where we'll be able to take some questions as well. I noticed there is a question in there, but I've got control of the screen.
Let me help you out there, Paul. So the question that came in is more about revenue sharing with third parties and just kind of, I guess, making the point that it hasn't been easy for developers in many countries, and kind of picking our brains a little bit on any thoughts on the role of Ministry of Communications or telecommunications can play in keeping costs affordable or promoting kind of good market entry. Happy to hear if any of you have any thoughts on that. I guess the honest answer is maybe 2 things. The one is within this project, we didn't get too involved in the role of regulation on doing this. And I think one of the things we were excited about is that this was driven from a business perspective, from our partners realizing that opening up could drive efficiencies for them and for third parties, and also could kind of increase innovation in the market and hopefully lead to increased usage. So I think that's the first point. The other point to make is we do see, regulators getting involved, and I think, but more from an open banking perspective. And I think that question is coming more and more into emerging markets, with emerging market regulators asking, is this something we should drive? And if so, what is the reason for us doing that? So do we take it from a competition perspective? I know that there are some markets like in Mexico where they are also taking it from a financial inclusion perspective, and with their fintech law also including open banking, trying to understand what the implications will be on financial inclusion. Have a look on our website as well. Our colleagues have done a paper on open banking and tried to look at what are the kind of the design elements that are relevant for financial inclusion. So if you go ahead with open banking, how do you make sure that it's relevant for financial inclusion? And then maybe lastly from my side is just to say that some things like PSD2 in Europe and open banking, there is one of the 2, I forget which one, which mandates that there's no cost involved in consuming the APIs. So they both have payment APIs as well as access to data, and they've kind of included an element that says if you qualify, so if you kind of get approved as a PISP or an AISP, that there's no cost involved in that. Maybe Leslie Ann knows which one, I forget. Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I would say actually there was a great webinar you can find on YouTube from the open banking team last week, where they talk about their research into open banking globally. And there's some public sector driven or regulatory driven initiatives, some private sector, and some of the differences. What they did notice as a common theme to this is that for financial inclusion, PISP, payment initiation, is an incredibly important API. And I think it's interesting that all of our partners have also started with that API. It's clearly a really important element of the driving the ecosystem and driving efficiencies and driving futures. But yeah, I would point you to the webinar from last week as well. It was good content.
Yeah, maybe just a very brief comment at my end. I think the good news in the case of the MTN implementation is that really the Open API business model doesn't really affect in any way traditional retail pricing of products and sort of the revenue sharing arrangements with third parties, in the sense that the Open API transactions are free for now. MTN has decided to go for a free access to simplify and encourage third parties to actually use their Open API platform. And so there's no charges linked to the API transactions. And the usual charges that MTN applies for revenue sharing or for payment transactions that go through their platform still prevail in a sense. So that's more on the effect of Open APIs on the pricing bit. In terms of regulators getting involved, actually they tend not to be too interested in regulating retail pricing and interfering with this. They have done so in the context of the COVID-19 response to accelerate effective sort of economic recovery in different markets. But usually you would see that regulators tend to be more engaged and involved in regulating sort of pricing around core infrastructure, which is B2B infrastructure, like instant payment platforms, for instance, where in India, there was a lot of regulation around pricing for this. But they tend to be less involved in really driving retail pricing, except for ecosystem-wide infrastructure like instant payments. And again, maybe that's one exception where you see countries like India and Mexico that have gone as far as regulating retail pricing to draw pricing close to a 0% mark to drive adoption. But I don't really expect them to be interfering in revenue sharing agreements and arrangements with third parties, for instance, for DFS providers, just as a quick sort of side note.
Excellent. I noticed we're getting a few questions. What I might do is I might play the next video and then we'll start jumping into these additional questions. So the next video, we asked our partners and advisors, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting?
My first advice would be that we should not waste a lot of time thinking whether to do it or not to do it. I think it's a matter of starting it right now, immediately, because I think the time to debate is over.
If I could give one piece of advice to someone starting on the beginning of an API journey, I would say that it is not a product. It is a standalone business. It requires a dedicated team. It may require a reorg. You may not have the structure necessary to be successful in developing an API. Because this is a product that has to be continually invested in. It's not a set it and forget it product. It's going to be a living, breathing thing, and it has to have dedicated focus. And then selling that API is going to be very different than selling any other product you've done. You have a completely different customer. They have a completely different kind of language that they use. And so don't underestimate what goes into it. It's very different from traditional business. And if you try and just tack it on as an also and, I suspect that you might tee up for failure.
I think being very deliberate about how this forms part of your core strategy of your business and how it forms part of where you're going and your roadmap. And then align resources, and funding accordingly. Because I think that's something that I feel like we almost didn't get right from the start, is that we ran this as a side project for some time without really fully explaining or getting buy-in in terms of what it could bring to the business.
My advice to people would be to think hard about their platform strategy, right? What are the core assets of the business that you already have? How can you leverage those assets to build a platform? Who are the customers of that platform, right? Is it customers? Is it merchants? Is it fintech businesses? Whatever it is. And then how can we build a business that goes after them, of which APIs are the core technical kind of capability, right? But you need to have the full pieces of all of that strategy around the APIs. Otherwise, just building an API and putting it out there and expecting somebody to come and use it, that's probably not going to work.
The biggest piece of advice would be to get top-level executive buy-in. If you're a large enterprise, get top-level support for opening up APIs, because it's not just a technology decision. There are commercial considerations, legal considerations, which need to be brought into. Have a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve, why you're doing it, and to what market, what's your target market for these APIs. Get that buy-in, understand the journey, and execute.
my piece of advice is very simple, and my answer will be simple. Keep it simple. That's it.
Okay, what we might do is we've got a number of questions coming through. We might run the third and last video, and then we'll try and get to those questions as we do before the top of the hour. So we then asked some of our partners, you know, engaging customers, what's the most effective way to drive usage of open APIs?
We launched the Open API about 6 months ago. We've created an engagement program for the community. We identified developers as our immediate target because we think if they buy in, then they're going to use it, but they're also going to recommend it. So we've done training, we've done some hackathons, we've done some sponsorships of their activities. But I think the most effective thing we've done is to collaborate with them. We identified one of the developers who is also running a local hub. And so with this developer, we've worked very closely to do documentation, to create libraries. We've done some training with him. And because he's well, you know, recommended in the community of developers and is very good at what he does, this has created buy-in from the community. And he is a great ambassador. And I think you need them to feel part of this, as if they are part of this, because then you are collaborating and not just throwing something at them.
Driving usage for us wasn't so much of a problem. We had an enormous demand, which was there. But in terms of engaging with developers, there are a few things that you need to get right. One, make it really easy to use. Okay, make it easy to understand. Provide it in the languages and platforms that your developer community want to use. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, make it cool. Because these are cool guys and cool ladies who are using it, and they want something that resonates with their way of working.
Excellent. So we've got a number of questions. Let me...
So Paul, while you're looking at the questions, let me just jump in with one of the comments made, which kind of resonated with me, was that in one of the videos, the speakers could have been speaking about mobile money in general, and that we've heard those lessons, you know, around mobile money deployments. And I think it's a good point. And I think that for me, coming towards the end of this kind of, you know, 4 years of working on this, it's pretty clear to me that I think we are at a similar space with open APIs where we were with mobile money like 10 years ago or something, where we know that there's, you know, an opportunity. We're starting to see some really good progress coming out of it. And we're starting to realize that, yeah, the details matter, as they did in mobile money deployments, and that it's, you know, that it's a product. And if you just open them, it's not going to be enough. And I think another lesson that we've learned is it's pretty similar to any other innovation product that you run within an organization. You're going to have the same kind of challenges where key people leave during the process, where there's prioritization, where you actually need to show some level of success relatively quickly, you know, before people lose interest and you lose resources for what you're trying to drive. So I think there's a lot of parallels. I think it's a good point. Yeah, but I'll stop there. I don't know, Paul, if there's another question you want to take.
Yeah, I'll merge a couple of questions together as they're coming through. So there's a question around the security of open APIs, and then sort of as it shifts into sort of data privacy and protection laws, and particularly in markets where those laws don't exist. And then what advice can we give to the fintechs in those countries trying to use them? And I'll make a sort of a broad statement, and then I sort of might hand over to the group. Is, you know, typically what I'm seeing in a lot of these emerging markets, it's, you know, things like data privacy. It almost needs to be the commercial sector that's going out creating businesses where regulations then have to follow in behind. And I think that's what we're starting to see, and especially these markets where Data is now being collected, it's now being shared, and those sort of data privacy and protection laws are coming up. I do see a lot of DFS providers, because they fall within the realm of financial regulations, they are very concerned around data privacy. But in terms of sort of that technical response, I might throw over to you, Leslie-Ann, just around the sort of the security layers that you're seeing DFS providers put in place to protect consumer data.
So I'd say, first of all of our partners in question, they chose not to focus on opening data APIs with customer data in. And that was because of the maturity model. We wanted to get them to think about the realities of working with this new segment before we got into more complex topics like opening data APIs, which they are more complex. I think for those who want to open data APIs, and I can see regulations are coming, for example, in Kenya, there is this requirement in the new data privacy law that customers are entitled to their data within a short period of time. And in the UK, that came from PSD2 and CMA9 kind of thinking for fintechs. So it may well come to that perspective. How you secure it, I think my simple answer to this is a solved problem if you do the technology well, you go look and you see what's going on in different markets. Plus, there are lots of open source style initiatives that are focused around cybersecurity done well. Plus, there are then fintechs who specialize in this kind of cybersecurity by design technology and privacy by design technology. So a big key answer to that is I'm not answering the question on the call. What I'm saying is these are solved problems. There are big thinkers out there thinking about this kind of stuff. And most of our partners would say they needed to buy in expertise to make sure that they were doing this well. All of the DFSPs that I've worked with over the years take data protection and data privacy very seriously, which actually makes it a very hard API to get approval to open, which is why we went with the simpler option. In markets where there's regulation that says it must be done, it's a different matter. And actually then I think shared services collaboration on design and the way that the CMA9 and the PSD2 and the open banking world are tackling it as a common shared problem to solve is a better way to think about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Leslie. And there's another question that's come in just around data localization. So slightly sort of off topic around sort of open APIs, but I think we can address it. So the question is there's a requirement around regulators globally to localize data, which they're seeing it's driving up a cost for fintechs, especially those that are addressing multiple markets. So just, are we seeing this as a common issue? And the question is, will governments back off? So I can answer the last one. Will governments back off? I'm seeing the trend the other way. I think the governments are seeing data as a sovereign asset, the data of their citizens as a sovereign asset, not just in financial technology, but across the board. And as that data flows out to overseas companies, they profit from their consumers' data. So I think
that's harsh, though, as an opinion. I worked at Microsoft for a little while, and the big technology companies that are cloud providers are very strong on compliance. They do not have access to data. It may be offshore, but it's not that they have access to it for sure. But what they are doing at the big cloud-based providers is really innovating on this problem space. So you can actually find out lots of information about how to have a hybrid model these days of Azure Edge and things like this, right? So there's a lot of change coming and happening because this is a recognized problem. It means that cloud adoption in the African continent is kind of localized to South Africa because it is locally hosted there. Economies of scale, shared services, it came into their own even in our own projects. So we had one partner who was completely cloud-based and we were able to run an experiment with open APIs with a very small budget spend. We had other partners that had to spend a lot of money and a lot of time and energy to get to a place where they could even start to play. And the contrast was very clear. So there is a business case for cloud. And I think some of the concerns are being discussed at a regulatory level between these big platform players, and innovation is happening.
So maybe I'll just add in there, one, this is why it's fun to work at CGAP, because we don't always agree on everything. But two, I think there is, I think, you know, irrespective of this specific topic, I think regulators in general are at a different place to where they were, say, 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, it was always, the answer was, you know, go and launch your product and then we'll tell you if you're compliant. Whereas now the answer is, hey, maybe we've got a sandbox, like come and talk to us. Maybe we can help you innovate. Like we can see some benefit from innovation. I know it's maybe anecdotally, but I know the regulator in South Africa was quite open to the idea of a digital bank launching, you know, using cloud.
But it helps that the hosting is in South Africa, Michelle.
No, it wasn't at the time. It is now, but it wasn't at the time of the launch. So, and yet they were still kind of, you know, they would just almost like take us on this journey with us, like educate us as we go along, which I think has changed.
And I think you can see that globally. So Monetary Theft Singapore is very much looking at this in a big way in that region. And the conversation is there. It's not a closed conversation.
Paul, maybe I can jump in just on that, on those data issues. I think the combination of like using your technology, using your business process, and then using your like legal contracts, I think putting all of those things together is probably like how we think about it. And just maybe a little plug there, going back to that CGAP Open API collection, you'll find on there, for example, like a contract template where we tried to get some experts from the UK who have done this in the context of open banking to say, well, can you kind of give, you know, walk us through your process and come up with a template which is, you know, fair for all parties. So I think what we don't want is a contract that's so one-sided that, you know, no one's going to try and build a business off of it. So what they've tried to do is say, well, what are the potential risks? Who's able to best manage those risks, and therefore who's liable? And for example, like, you know, if the DFS provider needs to shut you down at some point because of potential risks, making sure that the third party then has a process which is reasonably quick to kind of verify that whatever, you know, risk was identified is actually under control and kind of get them back live again. So all of those kind of things are managed on that template. So worth checking it out.
Excellent. We've got a couple of minutes left. I think one example I want to bring up is we've had some detailed discussions with Stripe and their open API strategy, and they're quite an interesting business. And I'll share a quick summary. So when they started in America, but now across the globe, their view was that they wanted to work with startups, but they didn't know which ones were going to be successful. So they effectively, and their view is they're investing in startups. So while they, you know, might not generate money or potentially lose money on a number of small startups, their view is that if they made it easy for a large number of startups to come into their platform, that there would be a number of big players that would come through. I think there's a couple of big ones. Airbnb's one of them, and that's where they make their revenue. So they had quite an interesting view of, it's almost like a VC type approach, is go out and try and acquire as many small startups as possible with the view that there'll be one or two really successful, and that's where they're going to generate their cash. I thought that was a really interesting approach in terms of how they were sort of building their ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe just to add a quick comment again and sort of bring a slightly different lens on the data topic. I think one of the next topics that's also going to be really interesting in this space to watch is reciprocity of data sharing requirements. And I think multiple jurisdictions are actually treating this very differently. If you look at Australia and Brazil, for instance, they are advocating for reciprocal data sharing between fintechs and financial services providers. Whereas, you know, in the PSD2 or UK's open banking frameworks, or even in Japan's sort of open API environment, it's only unilateral sharing of data from the major providers to the fintechs actually connecting through open APIs. And I think at some point, as this ecosystem and this industry continues to grow, reciprocity of data sharing is also going to be another really interesting issue, particularly as fintechs driven by digitalization tend to scale very, very quickly and might be amassing large quantities of data, are they going to be then forced as well to be sharing the data back to DFS providers or sharing the data back with banks? And I think that's going to be really exciting to watch.
Excellent.
Over to you, Paul.
I'm going to step in here and say thank you so much for a really enjoyable session. It was great for me for a change to sort of kick back and actually just listen as opposed to having to moderate. And wow, I think it was interesting. I was listening to the Women's World Banking virtual summit last night, and I was part of a discussion around digitizing wages. And the one thing that is really resonated from your session was, it was so much great success in getting women, especially, to have their wages sent to some form of e-wallet. But then the next challenge was, how can they use that money digitally and not just cash it out, but how can it be kept and used digitally? And that the use cases were such a big challenge. And listening to you speak today has really inspired me to think, well, this is how, like, open APIs allow users, to be able to suddenly have potentially a huge new ways of using that money, and that the open API can speed up that integration and make it cheaper, more affordable for the small guys as well as the big guys. So I guess it opens the doors to small little, maybe regional, school fees being paid, as opposed to it having to be something that's done on behalf of the entire country. And I'm really excited by the opportunities that the open APIs can provide. And I've always been a little worried about the topic because it always sounds very techy, but actually the way you've talked about it today, yes, obviously we need to get our heads around the technical side of things. And I'm sure there are many colleagues amongst us who have that techie brain, which I personally don't. But that's why we've got a lot of resources, and I've shared the link in the chat for this webinar, and I'll also share it with you all via email again when I share the recording tomorrow, because there are those resources out there. But I think you've left, well, certainly for me anyway, you've left me with a real inspiration that actually, this can bring huge change and great financial inclusion opportunity as well. So I thank you very much for sharing your hour of your day or evening, Paul, with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to the attendees that's also been with us throughout the session. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you all on a webinar again soon.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Bye. Everyone.